Welcome everyone to the Graduate School of Social Work. I'm James Herbert Williams, the Dean here, and this is part of our lecture series that celebrates the 80th anniversary of the school. And we're really pleased for our speaker today, for many reasons, because actually Barry Rosenberg is a friend that I've known for many years, and actually when I was reading over his bio, I said, wow, I didn't realize you had all these accomplishments. And it just goes to show you, when you're friends with someone, you sort of never think in those terms of what they do for their living. So Barry is the Executive Vice President for the Jewish Federation of St. Louis, and he's been there since 1993. For those of you who probably knows, it's a fairly large, prosperous organization. As I read through and realized that what was the last 5 campaigns have all been record-setting. So put your hands on your wallets, so to speak. But in all seriousness, he's I've spent many months and many hours sitting with Barry and talking, and I can tell you that I do not know probably a greater strategic thinker and a person that's more compassionate about the work that he does. He oversees a wonderful, comprehensive organization in St. Louis, and from my days in St. Louis when I was on the faculty at Washington University, I had the wonderful opportunity to hire him to be one of our adjunct teachers, so we go pretty far back in that particular area. Barry is originally from Boston, and also worked for the Federation in New Jersey before moving to St. Louis. And has an undergraduate degree from Northeastern University and a Master's of Social Work from the University of, but now I think it's called University of Albany. They changed the name actually, but it's SUNY Albany back when I said. We're really pleased that he was able to join us and be a part of our lecture series, and really excited to hear what he has to say. I can guarantee you it'll be very thoughtful and very provocative. Barry.
Thank you. Good morning. Although in St. Louis, I guess it's already afternoon. I'm really delighted and honored to be here with you today. For one, anytime I can see your dean, I'm there. Dean Williams was, as you know, my first boss at the Brown School and became a great friend, a trusted advisor, and really an inspiration to me. We miss him greatly in St. Louis, but very much admire the work that he's doing here in Denver, and you've got a real treasure, so you should be very proud and take good care of him. Take good care of him. Sometimes he needs a little bit of care, but take good care of him. It's also kind of a treat to see current and former colleagues and students, parents of students, a former employee of mine here, and to connect to the community in Denver. More than once in my career, I've looked for models of innovation here in Denver, and I am looking forward to hearing some of your own reactions and perspectives on my topic, and then returning here next November for the General Assembly of the Jewish Federations of North America, which will be a great event and I think a great opportunity for the school. I want to acknowledge that in the preparation for today, many colleagues, both in St. Louis and nationally, assisted as I thought through the question that I'm trying to address, social work in the Jewish community, renewing the partnership. But of all, I need to acknowledge my wife, Barbara Levin, herself a social worker, a former Jewish Communal executive, and now the director of the Alliance for Building Capacity at the Brown School of Social Work at Washington University, where, among other portfolios, she's responsible for Jewish communal service education. I have prepared a brief summary of the talk that will be available to you when you leave. If you do have to leave early, and as a fundraiser, I'm used to people walking out on me, please make sure you take a copy. For decades, a master's degree in social work was understood as the best and often essential passport to a successful and influential career in Jewish communal service, by which I mean the non-clerical, professional workforce of the American Jewish community. Jewish communal workers were prominent in social work education and professional associations. Jewish agencies were preferred practicum sites and underwrote graduate social work education for promising young staff. Top Jewish professionals contributed richly to the social work literature. Social work schools partnered with Jewish studies departments to offer dual master's degrees and other preparatory programs. Today, although many Jewish organizations employ social workers, the former dynamic nexus has been broken, perhaps shattered. Social work is no longer seen as the preferred professional discipline. Indeed, it is often discounted and unfortunately sometimes mocked in many quarters within the field. And this is particularly true among a new generation of young business entrepreneurs who, as major donors and board members, are assuming the leadership of the Jewish organizational world. Successful in their own careers, many are looking for replicas of themselves, having little knowledge or appreciation of the differences of the nonprofit world or the particular value of social work skills or professional practice in general. They offer the simplistic idea that nonprofit organizations need to be run like businesses, or worse, are actually businesses. As one of my colleagues put it, social work has become an epithet. So how did this occur? Is social work still a relevant discipline for the Jewish community? And if so, what needs to be done? And I offer these thoughts sort of at the tail end of a professional career, as you know, spent entirely in the Jewish world, and from a vantage point that affords me a very broad view of the Jewish landscape. For those unfamiliar, the Jewish Federation in each community serves as that community's primary fundraising and planning agency, supporting a wide variety of local Jewish institutions, such as community centers, family service agencies, senior adult services, and schools. Now, since I'm in a school of social work, I should make the statement I have no pretense to academic qualifications, nor am I really comprehensively involved in social work education. My connections are more casual, anecdotal, and impressionistic. But for the academics amongst us, you might take my remarks as a window to what the employment market thinks of the work that you're doing in the school. And if that market is incorrect, well, the truth is that perception can be far more important than reality. And the experience within the Jewish world has wider parallels in the ability of social work to meet the needs of nonprofit management in general. So while I have been and I will be somewhat critical about how social work has comported itself, I believe, as you will find out, that it continues to have so much to offer to the Jewish community. And the growing failure of many Jewish professional and volunteer leaders to appreciate social work values, knowledge, and expertise, I think contributes to the ills that we see in many of our community institutions. So I will try to do my best today to document and detail the reasons for decline, analyze the implications, and identify where social work can still be of great value to Jewish organizations, particularly in addressing the largest challenge facing the American Jewish community, the Jewish identity and engagement of our future generations. And third, to suggest briefly what social work needs to do to regain its position of relevance. First, I'd like to make an important distinction between social work performed in Jewish settings, for example, as a caseworker or an intake worker at a senior living facility, and the question of the applicability of social work knowledge, attitudes, and competencies to the larger field of Jewish communal service. And I'm going to focus primarily on the latter. The situation was neatly summarized recently in a letter from Richard Siegel of Hebrew Union College, which is one of the prime trainers of Jewish communal talent. And in explaining the name of the school, from the School of Jewish Communal Service to the School of Jewish Nonprofit Management, he noted, quote, how dramatically the expectations and demands of Jewish professionals have increased. In the early years of the school, the most common degree in the field was the Master of Social Work. Today, it is increasingly in public administration, business, or nonprofit management. Jewish communal professionals are now expected to be both savvy business managers and visionary leaders. On every level of organizational management, they are expected to be successful fundraisers, skilled human resource managers, creative program developers, visionary strategic planners, hard-nosed budget managers, imaginative marketing specialists, inspiring group motivators, master communicators, and innovative problem solvers. And to that list, I humbly add Messiah and Savior of the world. HUC previously emphasized a dual master's program built around social work. Today, with the tagline, quote, excellence in professional leadership, end quote, HUC offers Jewish communal training paired with degree options in business, public administration, and even communications management and public art studies, as well as social work. And this follows a similar shift away from social work at NYU. The cover of the Chronicle of Philanthropy's 2010 Continuing Education Guide asked provocatively, do you need an MBA? My own story is illustrative. I planned on pursuing a clinical career focusing on marriage and family counseling, the hot topics when I was in graduate school. However, I grew up in and then worked for the B'nai B'rith Youth Organization during college. And BBYO is a national informal education organization for Jewish teenagers. It offered me a generous scholarship to obtain my MSW with an obligation to work a mere 2 years after graduation. Well, 2 years stretched to 4, and then I joined the Jewish Federation in northern New Jersey, and I haven't done 1 hour of clinical practice since graduation. I recall my professor and mentor, Max Saporin, warning us that despite our best intentions, the majority of social work students would find ourselves taking on management roles within 3 years of graduation. For me, it happened on day 1 when I became a regional director. Yet other than a single course in social policy in those days, we received no management content in graduate school. For me, management and leadership were learned experientially on the job. Many of the most painful learning and hopefully growth-producing experiences came through confronting my limited business and management knowledge and skills. And looking back, I trust that I might have been much more impactful had I received formal training in the areas that have preoccupied my time: strategy, leadership, governance, financial and human resource management, and fundraising. Ironically, BBYO, my first employer, recently received a major grant to send today's young workers back to school for their MBAs. So think about the change from the time I went to school. The extent of the shift away from social work within Jewish settings, and for that matter, professional education of any kind, is dramatic. The starting point in examining the historic partnership is a long affinity between Jews and social work. Although Jews have never amounted to more than 4% of the American population, a report by Golden, Pins, and Jones reported that 16.4% of incoming social work students in 1966 were Jewish. In 1960, nearly 30% of incoming group work students in social work were Jewish, group work being the predominant service modality of many Jewish organizations. And in 1969, Armin Laufer reported that about 50% of the student bodies at the schools at Columbia, Hunter, and NYU were Jewish. Initially, the Jewish community established its own professional training programs. The first school of Jewish social work was established in 1913 by an agency affiliated with the Jewish Federation in Cincinnati. It and a similar attempt in New York had relatively short tenures. In 1957, what became Yeshiva University's Wurzweiler School became the first attempt to prepare Jewish communal workers in a university setting. In 1964, Arnulf Pins, then Associate Director of the Council for Social Work Education, CSWE, reported that whereas 80% of the personnel in the larger field of social work lacked graduate social work education, so 80% lacked graduate education, 80% of the professional personnel in Jewish social services had received social work graduate education. Pins quoted a 1962 study that 72% of all Jewish community center executives, sub-executives, and group workers held graduate social work degrees. The JCCs are generally the largest employers and Jewish agencies in any community and offer the most opportunities for professional employment. And despite those statistics, Pins was writing about a personnel shortage for the Jewish communal world in those days. Bernie Reisman, the former dean of the Hornstein program at Brandeis, called the 1940s and 50s a golden period in the relationship between JCCs and social work. And Jay Swyfak, who has written extensively about the JCC social work nexus, noted that at one time, a social work degree was the most prevalent academic credential, and the one most accepted as providing the skills necessary to carry out the mission of the Jewish Community Center. However, citing a study by Shore and Cohn, Swyfak reported that by 2001, only 13% of full-time JCC staff held an MSW, down from an already diminished 23% in 1987. Beyond the work, the leading Jewish social workers of those eras, names that might be familiar to some of our older folk, Jerry Bubis, David Dubin, Don Feldstein, Saul Greenfeld, Norman Linzer, Bernie Reisman, Arnold Pins, Sanford Solander, and others, were also teachers, prolific writers, and frequent presenters in the field. And in a 2002 review of literature, Swyfak cited over 100 publications relating to JCCs and social work. So this nexus was quite significant. Now, of course, social work still remains prominent and important in family service agencies and those agencies serving senior adults. And while some current workers hold dual degrees in social work and Jewish communal service, increasingly, clinical social service organizations do not believe it necessary to hire Jewish employees or to hire staff with specific Jewish training, in part because most of those agencies are also serving significant numbers of clients who are not Jewish. The trend away from social work is visible, and I would believe most troubling, at the executive level of the organization. In St. Louis, most of the older executives of Jewish organizations still hold MSWs. But in recent years, our JCC appointed a marketing professional and former volunteer as its executive. The Hillel Center at Washington University hired an attorney and former volunteer. It's doubtful that my successor will be a social work. Here in Denver, my colleague Doug Sesserman came from the field of marketing. And in recent years, high-profile executive positions at the Los Angeles, San Francisco, Detroit, and Montreal federations all went to non-social workers. In truth, in several cities, executive search committees have undertaken concerted efforts to move away from the social work model. At HUC, training in social work, sometimes paired with a degree in Jewish studies, is gradually being supplanted by programs in Jewish communal service alone or by dual degree programs which now pair Jewish studies with business, public administration, and nonprofit management. A 2005 study by Kellner, Rabkin, Sachs, and Scheingold found of organizational workers in organizations like federations, JCCs, Hillels, JCRCs, who choose to purchase, well, if you could do that, it would probably be good, but who choose to pursue one of the master's degrees typically associated with those jobs. 43% chose an MSW, 43% an MBA, 30% chose a degree in Jewish communal service or a certificate, and 4% chose a master's of public administration. And they further noted that younger professionals are significantly more likely to hold Jewish communal service degrees than older workers. For example, at HUC, one can earn a master's in Jewish nonprofit management completely devoid of the social work component. And the core components of that curriculum include coursework in Jewish studies, Jewish communal dynamics and nonprofit management, 2 years of supervised fieldwork internships, a capstone project, and a 2-week seminar in Israel. And finally, a study by Stephen M. Cohen surveyed some 2,400 self-selected Jewish communal professionals this past year. Based on his methodology, you could assume that these are generally the most professionally committed career-type professionals currently serving in the field on a national basis. Only 18% held an MSW degree, while 22% held another master's. Cohen observed the growing trend towards specifically Jewish training among younger workers, and I predict the decline in the number of social workers will only accelerate in the years to come. So what are some of the trends, some of the forces that led to the divorce? On one level, the American Jewish community's changing demography and integration into the larger society has lessened the role of concrete social services and thus social workers. Having evolved from a community of immigrants and first-generation Americans struggling to establish ourselves, today we are better educated, healthier, and more affluent than the larger society. And although the Jewish rates of social problems, such as domestic violence and substance abuse, mirror the larger society, Jews are much more accepted and comfortable accessing services in the larger society rather than in distinctly Jewish settings. In fact, many actually prefer it. In St. Louis, this has led the Federation to move away from what we have termed a parallel universe of agencies. In the past, Jewish doctors couldn't practice in established hospitals, so we formed our own. The larger community had a YMCA, and we built a JCC. They had a Protestant counseling agency. We created a Jewish family service. They had an old age home. We built one too. The forces that drove the creation of the Jewish social service network, discrimination, the need for culturally comfortable settings with kosher food or a place or workers who spoke Yiddish, these are largely of our past. In fact, many of our Jewish agencies long ago walked with their own feet. Jewish hospitals merged with secular institutions or just closed. Some vocational and family agencies secularized. A second set of factors is economic. Compensation is limited and social work is seen as a less attractive career. And with more dual income families, the workforce is less mobile. Whereas once professional advancement often meant moving from city to city, today many workers ready for the next career step need to find it outside of the Jewish community. On the flip side, reduced mobility combined with the high cost of recruitment and relocation have led many agencies to rely on local hiring, often making do with people who possess no specialized training or experience. And certainly outside of major population centers, Jewish organizations find it very difficult to recruit qualified talent to move. Questions about the value of professional education further reduce the drive to hire trained social workers. On the other hand, in the 60s and 70s, social work and social work education moved away from their focus on informal education and specializations that were central to much of Jewish community work. In 1972, Reisman noted that social work's shift to a more psychosocial treatment orientation and its increasing focus on social reform had pulled it away from settings like the JCC. This is particularly true in the abandonment of group work as a core competency or functional field. When I went to graduate school, although many schools still offered group work as a concentration, its decline was already evident. It was squeezed out of curricula by the new trend then toward generic models of education combining individual, group, and community work. I remember Alan Klein, who was a major figure in social group work literature, wandering the halls of my school in Albany like a lonely soul. But group work forms the basis of much that the Jewish community does, from youth work, camping, campus work, to senior adult recreation, to fundraising and managing committees and boards. Birnbaum and Pine reported that a 1991 survey of social work graduate schools revealed that graduate education had practically eliminated group work as a specialized area of study. At the same time, social work has failed to train and produce adequate numbers of graduates both committed to and skilled in nonprofit management. Peter Wunschel reports that the social work profession has not been able to keep up with the need for social workers trained in administration and management, and that interest in administration among students has been negligible, even though, again, 50% of all social workers report being involved in administrative functions. Today, there is a personnel crisis in Jewish communal service with a severe lack of adequately trained and skilled professionals to fill the direct service and particularly management roles within our organizations. And this will only be magnified as our field and the nonprofit world in general faces a massive turnover in its top ranks when the leading edge of the baby boomers retire. And if those social workers who do become managers lack the requisite knowledge, skills, and attitudes, they will adversely shape the attitudes of executives and board members regarding the value of social work to those organizations. We have to face it. Large numbers of social workers are math and numbers averse. They avoid learning finance and business practices and are uncomfortable with the reality and need for involvement in fundraising. Not all, but many. As an example, I served on the advisory board at a social work school, not Washington University, and seeking to leverage the power of its students and faculty to address social justice issues, I was asked to develop a plan to bring in more dollars for the program. I returned to the advisory board with a comprehensive marketing and fund development proposal. Midway through my presentation, I was angrily challenged by what might be described as a stereotypical social worker who asked why I was using business terminology to describe the plan. My simple reply was because it's relevant. Many of our nonprofits are large, complex organizations. They require the same sophisticated skills that any medium-sized business does. For me, the most interesting aspect of preparing for today's talk was to delve back into a lively debate that ensued during the 1960s and 70s about training specifically for careers in Jewish communal service versus the then preferred training in social work. As Jews assimilated into American society and Jewish distinctiveness began to wane, there was growing concern that the orientation of the social work profession was inconsistent and undermined a commitment to Jewish particularism, and especially to the fostering of Jewish identity. Bernie Reisman said, quote, "Advocating an ideological stance for a Jewish communal worker is contrary to the classical social work view that calls for a, quote, value-free attitude by the professional." He went on to strongly advocate turning away from social work as the prime training ground for the JCCs. Leonard Fine, one of American Jewry's most prominent thinkers and writers, suggested that social work was, quote, insistently opposed to concern for Judaism's soul, end quote. He continued that social workers who managed Jewish organizations were in the main neither interested nor qualified to confront the crisis of the spirit. Leon Jick, who went to Brandeis in 1966 and served as the first director of the Hornstein program, summarized the attitudes at Brandeis. Quote, "An MSW who was Jewishly illiterate was acceptable, but a Jewishly educated and sensitive worker who was viewed as deficient in professional skills was not." And then with great flair, Armin Laufer, in a 1969 speech, advocated the same position, declaring, quote, "A tradition has ended, a door has been closed. Gently but firmly, let us search for another one to open." I just love the drama of that, don't you? Now, all of this occurred before the Jewish intermarriage rate skyrocketed, before membership in Jewish organizations and congregations plummeted, before the countless Jewish continuity commissions, conferences, and articles. Today, other than Israel security, the number one issue on the Jewish agenda is identity. Is there a role for social work? Zweifach defined the question as whether social workers have the skills to fulfill the Jewish mission of the JCC, or whether others, such as Jewish educators, would be better suited. I'm going to return to that question of social workers' role. But before I do, it is clear that there are a number of service areas and functions that can and do make excellent use of social workers, and where we can see ongoing employment opportunities. As noted, I believe that in general, the place of Jewish-based services will decline, and therefore the need for specifically Jewish social workers. Yet there are a few areas with continued need. The Jewish community is aging faster than the surrounding society. Our 2000-2001 national population study found that 19% of the Jewish population is over the age of 65, compared to 12 to 13% of the larger society. This demographic reality and a well-honed and religiously based commitment to senior adult services means that for the foreseeable future, Jewish-based services for seniors will continue to be an important part of our communal system, providing long-term care, low-income housing, naturally occurring retirement communities, information and referral, case management, nutrition, transportation, and social cultural activities. A second area, though relatively small, is the ongoing need for culturally competent workers to address the social service needs of the most religiously observant segments of our community. In identifying other areas where social work competencies and Jewish communal needs converge, we should really look at the core attributes of social work that may be relevant to our community. One is clearly the profession's foundational value commitment to social justice, which is parallel to the Jewish imperative of tzedek. How different in reality is the social worker's advocacy for the oppressed and disadvantaged from the Jewish drive for tikkun olam, repair of the world? Whereas in the 1960s, social work may have been seen as antithetical to Jewish particularistic values, it may be today the young Jews who choose social work are doing so precisely because of this drive to tikkun. Likewise, other core values of social work are aligned with the values we wish to see in our organizations and our society. A commitment to the dignity of the individual and the valuing of human diversity and inclusiveness. In Judaism, B'Tselem Elohim. A commitment to community, Kehillah. Ethical practice, Derech Musar. Continuing education, Limud. In truth, isn't the do-gooder really the same as the one who performs Gemilut Hasadim, acts of loving kindness? So where else does social work in the Jewish world converge? A passion, sometimes approximating a religious conviction, to place mission at the very center of what we do. Historic competencies in social group work and community organization, which have played such key roles in Jewish settings. And here it's important to distinguish social group work from related processes such as group therapy or even support groups. Whereas social work groups may indeed and usually do promote growth and development and provide support and affirmation, I'm focusing here on groups that are formed primarily in recreational, informal education, and voluntary action settings, such as youth groups, summer camps, and volunteer committees. Here, the goals are oriented toward task achievement, or such outcomes as development of social, interpersonal, or leadership skills, growth of group and communal identity, or acquisition of knowledge. Another area of conversion is training and detailed knowledge around individual, family, group, and community development, dynamics, and behavior, as well as the interaction between them. There is a rising commitment and competence in evidence-based practice, program evaluation, and social entrepreneurship. And specific social work approaches, almost slogans, such as the imperative to start where the client is, the conscious use of self, a holistic person and environment view, and in the emphasis on a strength and capacity building approach to solving problems, I think are particularly relevant to some of our Jewish priorities. So what are the areas where social work has a continued major role? One is community organization and community building in general, and particularly in efforts to promote and implement collaborative strategies in light of limited financial resources. The American Jewish community is not an oppressed or disadvantaged one, but it is severely challenged. We face internal enemies, increasing interdenominational and ideological conflict, threaten unity, and the risk of an historic break in the Jewish people between the more observant and religiously liberal. The Jewish community is very worried about a decline in a commitment to what we refer to as collective responsibility and connection to traditional organizations. Can sophisticated knowledge of community dynamics and skills in defining both shared interest, building cooperation, mobilizing action, can these prove useful? I would think so. Connected to that is the fact that declining population and organizational affiliation and increasing assimilation, coupled with the impact of the recession, are driving much greater interest and effort in achieving collaboration, consolidation, and merger of organizations. And I would imagine, like in Jewish communities all over the country, that conversation is going on here in Denver. For example, our federation is actively promoting the consolidation of several day schools, promoting similar efforts among congregations, and actively promoting collaborative and administrative and purchasing agreements. Now, these are goals that are usually approached from a bottom-line financial perspective, and one might assume that people trained in business would be the best leaders in addressing those kinds of issues. However, the experience points to the reality that overcoming the inherent obstacles in such efforts of collaboration requires a primary focus on mission and combined with trust-building group facilitative processes. Sounds like social work to me. Another area is education and advocacy around Israel, Jewish security, and anti-Semitism, not areas we've traditionally thought of about from social work. In the Jewish community, the Iranian threat, international efforts to delegitimize Israel, promotions of boycotts and sanctions against Israel, and the rising frequency of physical attacks on Jews and Jewish institutions call for expanded activism. Much of this work relies on core social work community organization competencies, such as building grassroots networks, creating coalitions with other ethnic, religious, and special interest groups, informal education, and policy-oriented lobbying. Many of the groups the Jewish community needs to engage with around these issues, church groups, ethnic minorities, labor unions, academics, are deeply rooted in liberal social justice perspectives and activism. In truth, that makes social workers particularly appropriate liaisons to engage around these kinds of areas. Another area is volunteer management and leadership development. The Jewish community has an enormous need to recruit, train, and place large numbers of qualified volunteer leaders, especially young adults, in our organizational structure. Now, lots of disciplines, including business, teach leadership. Yet social group work techniques have long been used in this regard. Those of us who began our careers in BBYO used classic leadership group techniques to develop young people. They promote effective democratic group processes, which encourage engagement, indigenous leadership, personal skill development, empowerment, and promote collective responsibility, collaboration, and cooperation. In St. Louis, we recently created an Institute for Jewish Leadership designed to engage, train, and develop both professional and volunteer leaders. Among the things we are planning to teach are governance, fiduciary responsibility, fundraising, strategic planning, as well as Jewish values, ethics, and the sociology and dynamics of the American Jewish community. Now, we might have looked to MBAs, rabbis, or academics to lead this effort, and we will certainly employ them as faculty and speakers. But we built the program around two experienced, Jewishly trained and committed social group workers. What they may lack in specific up-to-date knowledge and theories about leadership and management, they more than compensate for in the ability to involve, inspire, and bring people together. And because until we do that, none of the training we offer will actually matter. Now, it's kind of ironic that actually the son of one of those workers just recently applied to the university, and I brought his resume for you, and I'm hoping I might get a finder's fee for bringing you a student. Fabulous family. Fabulous family. Like mother, like son, I think. Okay. Another area that we need to look at is the question of how we address the baby boomer generation in direct service volunteerism and encore careers. Those of you who've been following the discussion recognize that older people like me are getting ready to step down. And what will we do with our talent and our time and our passion for community service? Well, the skill sets involved in volunteer management, and I have a former volunteer manager at the Federation here in the audience, they include program planning and evaluation, individual assessment and supervision, education and coaching, organizational change management, conflict resolution, and helping align people and organizations. Again, all elements of classic social work training. The social work value system, extensive experience with volunteers, and a long-standing interest in civic engagement provide an important framework for promoting volunteerism. And fundraising. Perhaps nothing is more central to the work that we do in the Jewish agenda. And increasingly, our agencies are looking for CEOs who can serve as the Chief Development Officer. My colleague Bill Bernstein in the 1987 article argued that fundraising is a social work process. Using a theoretical model developed by William Schwartz, he focused on generic tasks, activities that a social worker does with any client system, and he translated them into fundraising. So for example, the task of searching out the common ground between the client's perception of his or her own needs and the societal demands on which he is faced, I might call this marketing or crafting the ask, trying to find that connection between the person and the need, or offering data and value concepts which may help him or her cope with the issues he is facing. Isn't this really the case for giving? Likewise, lending a vision of a better reality, one of the things that our clinical workers do. Irrespective of the utility of the Schwartz model, it should be clear to anyone who has done serious major gift fundraising that social work training is relevant. In the donor-centered cultivation model that we all must adopt, the fundraiser assesses interests, motivations, aspirations, personal style, family and business forces, and, quote, starts where the donor is. Okay. And few things are as intimate as finances in discussing major gifts with a potential donor. So a profound commitment to confidentiality and professional ethics is critical. So much of our fundraising, our dinners and our events requires working with groups of volunteers. All of these are central social work skills. And the most basic skill set is establishing and maintaining a productive, trusting relationship, the foundation of social work practice. I've saved my two last and most significant areas for last. I've saved my last for last. Very good. I've saved my two most significant areas for last. The first is mission-based management. Jewish communal institutions are not businesses. Yes, we must utilize knowledge, skills, and best practices derived from the business and other worlds. Yes, we must be committed to accountability, transparency, efficiency, and data-driven decision-making. However, the success of nonprofits will not come from running them like businesses. Recently, Charity Navigator announced, I would say finally admitted, that its long held and irresponsible method of rating charities based on fundraising and administrative ratios and the level of financial reserves was inadequate. It's now trying to measure or introduce measures of impact, or at least a commitment to impact in how it rates charities. Let me emphasize one more time. I am actually alarmed at many social workers' resistance to data and outcome-based evaluation, cost-benefit analysis, application of modern management techniques, and discomfort with finances. I will scream if I hear once again from a worker, to save one person is to save the world. It's a wonderful Jewish sentiment, but it cannot be an excuse for actual poor results. Or hearing that from an organization that we are the best kept secret in the community as an excuse for why nobody's using your services. We have to be real about how we look at our work and how we introduce best practices into it. I consider it an ethical imperative to efficiently and effectively utilize limited financial resources, whether generated through user fees, contributions, or government appropriations. And while there is improvement, broadly the skill sets and commitment to these principles is lacking in the Jewish world. So lay leaders and executives turn away from social workers. This trend, coupled with the greater sexiness of the MBA, has led students who are serious about professional leadership to increasingly choose the MBA or nonprofit management track for their training. They perceive that their skills and marketability will be greatly enhanced by going in that direction, even more than choosing social work administration. So what's wrong with this? Well, we are running mission-based institutions, and in any mission-based organization, success comes from a clear and comprehensive understanding of the mission, the clients and settings served, the problems to be addressed, the outcomes to be achieved, combined with well-honed skills specific to the particular field. It is then that the application of knowledge, skills, and best practices from business and other fields can be used to enhance mission attainment. That's why in education, medicine, the arts, research, we have no problem with these institutions being run by people who are themselves practitioners, especially if they've studied in specialized programs such as educational or medical administration or museum management. Yet in the Jewish community, we may understand the need for workers with strong knowledge of the American Jewish community, combined with classical social work skills, but we don't want to turn the asylum over to the inmates. Let's make sure we have some hard-headed business people in senior management. But it is precisely at the management and governance level of nonprofit organizations that we ultimately empower or stifle quality work. The risk is that lacking a deep understanding of the work that the agency does, the clients it serves, and the value that social workers bring, such leaders will not provide the policy and managerial support these organizations need to flourish. The risk is underscored by studies of social workers in host settings, such as hospitals where social work is not the predominant discipline. Authors note that there's a particular challenge for them to continue to demonstrate their work within those host settings. Moreover, increasingly, we have come to view the chief professionals not just as managers. We look to them for leadership, and leadership is about defining and articulating vision and strategy to meet that vision. How is that possible without deep grounding in the mission? Now, I don't have sufficient knowledge to know whether it's possible to run any for-profit business strictly by the numbers. I hear some people say that you can do it. But I have seen serious evidence of the failure, sometimes catastrophic, of supposed business-based leadership on Jewish organizations. And I'd like to give at least one illustration. St. Louis had a Jewish nursing home with a long history of service, a clear brand as a central Jewish institution, a high ratio of economically needy Medicaid patients, and significant communal affection. The facility was tired, out of date, operationally inefficient, and challenged to compete with newer for-profit homes for private pay patients, especially those who didn't have strong Jewish needs. Following the departure of a longtime executive, it hired a brash but accomplished social worker from New York who immediately clashed over control with the affluent, successful businessmen who formed the core of its board. They fired him in quick order and hired a new director, though he had no experience in the field, was seen as a financial superstar, having excelled in banking. Together, the new board and executive set off to redevelop the property into a state-of-the-art continuum of care complex. Its business model posited that through exceptional amenities, it could attract the lucrative private pay patients who would subsidize the cost of under-reimbursed Medicaid patients. Thus, the board of directors would have a place they were proud to place their own parents, and Medicaid patients would be afforded an exceptional facility. A very nice vision. Even after their initial grandiose $110 million plan was wrestled down by community leaders, they won approval, government financing, and the sign-off of a slew of bankers and financial consultants to build the first phase. To the consternation of many, they tore down the old, inefficient building. An independent living component, part of the big plan, was deferred, though the central community building with restaurant, lounges, synagogues, offices, boardrooms, etc. was built anyway, though it offered no contribution to the top line. The facility is stunning. The executive, paid well above the nonprofit norm, was also offered very large bonuses for delivering the project to completion. The leadership, a tight circle of real estate developers, merchant bankers, and other entrepreneurs, rebuffed every community objection, vowing that if the Federation wouldn't support them, they'd just go it alone. Six months before opening, the new financial projections showed that based on the planned payer mix, the facility couldn't generate a positive cash flow. In response, the number of Medicaid beds were capped. To appeal to a wider market, the facility changed its name, dropping the word Jewish. It tried to downgrade having expensive kosher food. It skimped on help and suffered an increasingly bad reputation for service. Upon completion of the facility, the executive took his money and ran to Las Vegas, where he was subsequently charged with securities fraud in an unrelated case. The leaders who approved the fiasco quickly dropped away, leaving it to the Federation and others to pick up the pieces. The twists and turns of this story are epic, but the bottom line is that after years of struggle, the facility was sold back to its bondholders and is now being operated as a for-profit. Experts suggested that the $60 million facility was even more inefficient than its predecessor and overbuilt by some $25 million. Ironically, the new owners are rebranding it as a Jewish facility. The costs associated with a 7-year effort to save it were enormous. The nonprofit holding corporation is left with $1.5 million and some vacant land where the old building stood. the Jewish community in St. Louis will never again offer long-term care. So what happened? Several points. A self-selected, closed circle of super-confident volunteer leaders rejected all communal input and lost complete touch with its primary market. A group of people with no expertise in senior care made policy and operational decisions that doomed the agency. The lack of commitment to mission undercut patient care and communal support, and the ability to get the project done overwhelmed any sober analysis of whether the project was right. I have other examples, but I think it's really important just to underscore that you can't generalize from these kinds of experiences, and I'm not suggesting that you should. There are many business-trained people who are effective leaders of mission-based organizations. But I offer this example and others to illustrate how business thinking can be misapplied to the nonprofit sector and to illustrate the power of social work techniques even in business-oriented enterprises. Mirroring trends in the larger nonprofit sector, recent surveys indicate that as many as 75% of the chief executives at Jewish nonprofits will retire in the next 5 to 10 years. There will be an enormous need to fill the pipeline with visionary, passionate, skilled, experienced people. This is an enormous opportunity for social work to help shape the next decades of development of the Jewish organizational world. And if social work doesn't fill that need, others will, and the ability of our profession to play a leadership role will be severely diminished, if not lost. And what is most intriguing, exciting, and promising to me is to turn the original objection to social work on its head and to suggest that rather than being antithetical to Jewish particularism, social work might just well be the ideal discipline to address what is most pressing agenda of our community, Jewish identity. You recall I said that in the 60s and 70s, Jewish professional leaders turned away from social work, believing that the field's evolution, its non-judgmental value structure, and the self-selection characteristics of students made it unsympathetic to the needs of the Jewish community to inspire Jewish identity. Separate or dual degree programs in Jewish communal service were established, and these were the earliest days of the communal concern for declining Jewish identity. The field was looking for well-versed role models who would advocate for Jewish life. The dilemma facing the Jewish community is illustrated by this question. What should the social worker do when a young Jewish person came for counseling as she was considering marrying out of the faith? Well, what the community wanted was the Jewish equivalent of just say no, not something that really fits in the social work model. Today, we know that the rejection and guilt model has been largely unsuccessful in preventing the profound demographic changes that have occurred. Although inspiring role models can have a big impact, overall our approaches have shifted to a multifaceted, non-judgmental engagement model where we try to help the young person to find a personally meaningful place in Jewish life. The community offers a wealth of low-barrier entry points, even providing free access to powerful Jewish experiences such as Israel trips. This approach is highly compatible with social work values and methodologies. Even Chabad Lubavitch, the ubiquitous Orthodox outreach movement, prides itself in accepting and validating each individual where they are, knowing that doing so can start young people on an upward spiral of serious Jewish engagement. This approach also reflects changes in the sociology and identity structure of the emerging young adult population. We now understand Jewish identity is neither fixed nor bipolar, either on or off. We see the millennial generation being extremely comfortable with multiple identities, living in multiple communities, many of which are virtual or non-geographic. We now see identity as a journey that ebbs and flows, twists and turns. Denominational labels such as Reform and Conservative are losing their significance as Jews become increasingly individualistic, borrowing from numerous ideas and practices to craft an identity that is unique. And we are seeing more and more young adults turn away from mainstream Jewish institutions such as congregations, JCs, and federations. They are embracing do-it-yourself Judaism, establishing volunteer-led prayer services, seeking empowerment to define and experience Jewish life the way they want without the authority of a rabbi or communal leader. Thus, having a young, intermarried Jew who refuses to join a congregation but can belong to an informal havara of families that celebrate holidays and Shabbat together. He may send his daughter to a conservative day school, study online with an Orthodox rabbi in Jerusalem, and keep vegan kosher. This person is not such an unusual model today in the evolving American Jewish community. And against this backdrop, which professional discipline is most equipped to address the identity challenge? Well, I think you know where I'm going. The three essential goals of the Jewish identity agenda are: the first is to empower people to find meaning, direction, nurturance, and joy in their Judaism. The second is to connect the individual to the larger Jewish people in such a way that they see and feel themselves as part of the Jewish collective, nurtured by it and responsible to it. And the third is to inspire personal behavior reflecting the ideals and values of Judaism to seek social justice and repair the world. Re-enter social work and its unique role and skill sets. The social work model of engaging people where they are, empowering them to find the correct path for themselves, is so in tune with the needs and changes we are seeing among young people. For example, in St. Louis, we are introducing an approach to engagement we call the concierge model. We are hiring workers whose sole job, only job, is to reach out to certain populations such as young couples with children or returnees from Birthright Israel trips. And in coffee shops and living rooms, they go where the people are, learn about their interests, hopes, and needs, and then connect them to the opportunities within the community that are right for them. They don't come as representatives, actually marketers, selling one organization or another. And not only do they make the referral, they make an introduction and then follow up to see if the connection was successful. If not, they'll search for a new opportunity. Isn't this actually the classic social work information and referral function applied to Jewish identity? Moreover, recent evaluation and research on Jewish identity building has identified several types of programs as most effective in inspiring Jewish connection. Beyond day schools, they are Jewish summer camps, Israel trips, and Jewish youth groups, the classical areas where social workers dominated for years. Regarding the second goal, connecting people to the larger society, as contrasted with psychiatry and psychology, the unique perspective of social work has always been person in society. As William Schwartz said, the role of social work is to, quote, mediate the process through which the individual and his society reach out for each other through mutual need for self-fulfillment. Our communal preoccupation with sustaining Jewish peoplehood and balancing individual autonomy with collective responsibility are the types of challenges that social work has already addressed. And to the third basic objective, I've already commented on the alignment of social work and Judaism regarding social justice. In a new manifesto for the field, Abraham and Windmuller declared, "The Jewish communal enterprise must encompass a dual commitment to the welfare of Jews who are in economic, emotional, and social crisis, and to policies and practices of government and the nonprofit sector in securing the American dream for all of this nation's citizens." It sounds like social work to me. So as my father was fond of saying, if you wait long enough, soon everything comes back in style. Of course, he was talking about his old suits. Now, it could be said that the question of which training is better is false. Are business skills needed? Of course. Are the well-honed interpersonal skills of the social worker valuable? Obviously. Isn't political savvy and skill critical in nonprofit leadership? Unquestionably. So maybe the argument is for a truly eclectic knowledge and skill set and cross-disciplinary training. Similarly, others may suggest that many of these skills are generic. After all, budget management in a for-profit isn't much different than it is in a non-profit. And aren't what we call social work skills just highly developed interpersonal capacities? We're good with people. Well, yes and no. Clearly, there is much that is generic, but I do believe there is something deeper and transcendent in embedding these skills within a professional discipline like social work, where there is extensive training in individual behavior, group and community dynamics, encompassing theory, and a well-formulated values and ethical framework. Could other professionals do the same thing? Yes, but I'm not so sure that they would do it the way social workers will. So to summarize, let's look once more at the predominant fields, settings, and functions of Jewish communal service and the applicability of social work to them. It is certainly self-evident regarding traditional social services. In community relations and advocacy work, one can make a strong case for classic group and community organization skills, as well as social workers' deep commitment to social justice. Within Jewish federations, there are strong needs for social work skill sets in conducting needs assessments, program planning and evaluation, and of course, leadership development, volunteer management, and fundraising. Within formal Jewish education settings such as schools, there are probably limited roles. However, in the equally critical field of informal Jewish education, I hope I have successfully argued that social work knowledge, values, and skills are still fully relevant to organizations including JCC's campus programs like Hillel, Jewish family education, summer camps, and youth groups. The big question relates to management and organizational leadership. Here, social workers will need to acquire the training, the skills, the necessary attitudes that will enable them to compete with MBAs, MPAs, and the graduates of nonprofit management programs. This challenge applies equally to social work's penetration of the nonprofit management world in general. Where should this knowledge and these skills be acquired? Well, given the limited budgets and weak commitment to in-service training in the nonprofit field, it's unlikely that most social workers will get solid, well-constructed training on the job. Moreover, given the quality of management in the field, we might be somewhat skeptical of the ability of many current practitioners to provide or even evaluate sound training. I learned a lot of what not to do from my supervisors over my career. Will workers themselves invest in their own continuing education? Well, some will. I presume some of them are here today. However, the cost of advanced or continuing education as well as time commitments are strong disincentives. These skills in management and business are being taught in those competitive programs. To compete, social work education will need to become much more serious about this aspect of its training. And unquestionably, to succeed in the Jewish communal world, today's workers will need to be knowledgeable Jews, living a personally meaningful Jewish life, possessing broad familiarity with the contemporary Jewish scene, its sociology, its institutions, its dynamics, its agenda, and Israel. Even if we achieve all of those conditions, the debate will rage on as to which training best prepares people for management and leadership positions within Jewish organizations. I'm going to give the last word to your own Professor James Moran. In a 1995 paper with Douglas Franz and Priscilla Gibson, the authors compared the aptitudes of beginning MSW and MBA students for human service management. They concluded, quote, MSW students appear to bring with them a value base and personal orientation that provide an advantage over MBA students in managing human service agencies. MSWs are better attuned to the mission and scope of services offered by most human service organizations. After all, we are running mission-centered organizations, and as any well-trained social worker understands, mission comes first. Thank you.
Did I tell you? So, I'll take that.
You'll take that.
Yes.
I think he gets a scholarship, I'm pretty sure.
Okay. And thank you very much. I'm sure the audience has a number of questions they'd like to ask. I'd just like to say, we're in the process of redoing our curriculum right now, so obviously we need to bring you back.
Oh, okay. I'm here. As I said, anytime.
Questions?
Questions, comments, criticisms? Yeah.
When you mentioned the 60s being antithetical, was that in terms of Jewish particularism? Was that the context?
There were several aspects of it. There was the move of social work towards psychosocial issues and counseling as becoming the primary direction, which I remember very, very clearly. There was the engagement in the great social movements of that time and particular questions of community organization, but for underserved communities, all of which really didn't fit the Jewish community model. But I think the real piece that drove those giants of my world was this notion that social workers were approaching their work from a value-free kind of perspective. I remember when I studied clinical work in the Rogerian model, you know, where we're not going to impose our value system, we're going to help people discover their own. Well, as we were looking at assimilation, as we were looking at the beginning movement away from intense Jewish engagement, that was perceived of as a threat. And those of you who grew up working in the Jewish communal field know that most of us, and myself included, by the way, did not come from rich Jewish backgrounds in many cases. We fell into it. We liked it. We had a connection. It was social. It was educational. But we didn't have the deep kind of Jewish background that would give a context to the work that we were doing from a Jewish perspective. Anyone?
First of all, Barry, Yasher Koach,
Thank you.
A wonderful presentation. You did a great job of pulling it together. Wanted to share an observation and ask a question. Maybe the observation was not valid, but this is based on 13 years of as a Jewish communal professional in 3 communities.
Right.
And I noticed way back when that, and I don't know if it was actively done by Federation, I think it's probably a piece of it, but there used to be a model where you, as a young leader, you'd get on a committee of an agency, and then after a little bit of time, you learn a little, you then move to the board.
Right.
And then when you're, quote, seasoned, or at least have some broad experience, jump to Federation. And I started seeing very early on, we're talking probably the late 70s on, of people, particularly in the larger communities, going right to Federation without that experience. And I don't know if they were recruited or it was the relationship piece. Do you see that today, like in your community? Do you see trends, or is that just an isolated observation?
So we're talking about the career path of volunteer leaders and the idea of moving up. And I think what you describe is still fairly prevalent, at least as regards the Federation. And there are several dynamics. One, particularly younger adults today don't have the willingness, the patience, or the time sometimes to work their way up the ladder. You know, and we in the Jewish community often call people in their mid-40s young leaders. And when you think about that, that's really not very, very young. But because most of the leaders have been in their 60s and 70s, it may look that way. I think the bigger problem for Federation is that our primary responsibility is fundraising, and fundraising has become a major gift game, as it is in the university and it is in every setting. And to capture those people who have both the capacity and the interest in providing major gifts, you really do have to fast track them. You know, if you go back 30 years, Jewish individuals who were Jewish who wanted to be involved in civic life had really only choices within the Jewish community. Not exclusively, but in most communities it was unlikely that the chairman of the board of the symphony or the art museum was going to be a Jewish business person. They became the leaders of the Federation, social service agencies, maybe the Jewish hospital. They might have been on the boards of some of those organizations, but they weren't really going to be able, in most cases, to penetrate the top tiers of leadership. Today we are sought after by everybody. We've succeeded, and therefore the competition for the best talent has become very, very intense, and I think that's a big part of what you're seeing. Yeah.
Well, I agree with everything you said.
Everything?
Today. Everything.
Stop now.
And
boy, it's better to be in Denver than it is in St. Louis, but nobody agrees with anything I said.
It's the job. And things that I have thought about for my 30-plus years in the field,
right.
Because I got my MSW to be a BBYO director, and that's what happened. And
we're going to start singing very soon.
Exactly. But again, I've been thinking about these things for 30 years. And as my colleagues who are here know, for the 12 years I was here at the Graduate School of Social Work, how do we get this message out? I mean, how do we engage the current leadership, the current executives, the current communities in understanding what you've talked about today, the schools of social work, to understand what you're talking about today so that it becomes more than a concept and a theory and actually is able to be implemented in some way?
It's very hard. I give really great credit to Dean Williams and the school for putting the subject on the agenda and hoping that this opens an avenue for discussion here in Denver. It's going to take concerted effort. The train is very, very far out of the station. And I think it needs to be, like everything this day, evidence-based. We really need to go out there and make a rational, well-reasoned case for this. But as I hope my message was clear, as social workers, we need to clean up our act as well. And this is as much a reaction to the weakness. You know, our organization has about a $6 million budget. I have 50 employees. It's a complex institution, okay? And and as I said, I got absolutely zero training, okay, in any of the core skill sets necessary to do that. BBY was a great training ground. So I think and my challenge, and you know, I think James Herbert knows that even when I sat around when he was at the Brown School and I sat around the table at the Management Specialization Committee and the Dean's Advisory Committee, I just kept pounding on the table and saying, we have got to take management seriously. And if you look at what you want, if you want social work values, the social work ideology, the social work skill sets to provide leadership in the nonprofit world, as opposed to the manpower that does the work, going to have to get serious, and you're going to really have to produce it. But I would urge engaging these conversations. I think it will be hard. What the American Jewish community is experiencing is the rise of the younger entrepreneurial business people, very successful, very used to making their own decisions, not comfortable with process. One of my major donors, I mean, when I say the word process, he screams. I've had to develop new language to talk to him about what it means to go through steps to get something done. Because he runs his organization on a and it's a big organization, on a highly hands-on level. And he sends an email at 12, and he expects a response at 12:05, and he expects the response that he's looking for. So engaging those people and helping them see the value, we're going to have to set the model. That's I think the core of it.
Barry, and you're right. And you and I have had this conversation many, many years about sort of where social work should be going. And as a dean here, it's 80% of our students, and I like how you start off that you went to Albany and you were in clinical, but you never did a clinical hour. 80% of our students come here because they want to do clinical work.
Right.
That's what they come here for. And as a matter of fact, if you even try to talk a community or management piece in their class, you get that recoil.
Like that woman I told you about who said, "Why are you using business language?" Yeah.
And so we have a challenge. I have a challenge with my colleagues of how to address this. But I think the concepts you've laid out also is not just within the Jewish community. If you look at nonprofits across social services these days, they're not run by social workers as much anymore. So it's a trend not just within the Jewish community, it's a trend within human services in general. So you've laid out a challenge to us that we do need to address.
Yes.
So Yasher Koach, and thank you. Perhaps a perspective from a Jewish student. My name is Ari Renee Cloak, and I chose the school purposely because of the possibility of combining the community and leadership track, a sort of subclinical specialty, with the Jewish Communal Service Certificate, and I chose it over Hebrew Union College and over Los Angeles because I thought social work and Jewish Communal Service would be the perfect connector. I was getting a little nervous when you said there was a divorce, but since you said there wasn't a get quite yet, we still have a chance. But I would like to I'd like to express the hope that perhaps the certificate in Jewish Communal Service could be reinstated at this school as a means of joining these two areas of specialization. And thank you for the hope and the light that you've shed on this.
Thank you. When we started talking about what would be meaningful for this opportunity, because this is really just to go drinking with James Herbert. I mean, the rest of it was just fluff. This is a piece that really bothers me, and and in truth, when I first titled it, it was a darker title, okay? It was really only delving into it as much as I did over the last 8 or 9 months, that the essential underlying attitudes, value system, and skill sets became so completely apparent. You know, and I remember I was talking with a colleague who graduated of the Master's Jewish Studies program at Maryland, somebody that I've worked with for many, many years. And we were talking about getting feedback about how good he was in resolving conflicts within committees. And he said, what do you expect? We were trained in how to do that. That was what the social group work training was. But that's what we spend all of our time doing in Jewish federations, is resolving conflicts in committees. So I encourage you to continue to pursue it. There's no question it can be done. What I'm really reflecting are the larger trends and the ability of social work to continue to place its unique mark on the social service field. Yes?
Okay, I'm going to put my neck out there a little bit, because
Please.
I have kind of a question, comment, and so on. Because I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about those of us in social work practice as non-Jews in Jewish facilities.
Yeah.
And what I'll expand a little bit more. My career is at Jewish Family Service here in Denver, and I work in our senior department. And I'm going into my 12th year, and it's my passion, it's my career, it's my life's work. Quite honestly, I recognize, and we're a fairly large organization with several different focuses of service, and I recognize there are roles in my agency that I would not seek out, partly because personally I don't want to, but because I don't have that Jewish identity. But the other thing I want to kind of say is commentary, and then I have a question. In our organization, we have an incredible community reputation. We have expertise, again, in clinical, senior, emergency services, and disability services. And so sometimes I believe we present ourselves to the community as, yes, we're a Jewish organization with Jewish values, but we have this expertise that we're offering to everybody, similar to the National Jewish Hospital that specializes in respiratory care. People go there because they're experts in respiratory care, not entirely because they're a Jewish organization. Likewise, I think that happens a lot at Jewish Family Service. So I guess and the other comment I want to make is that one of my roles is to supervise student interns, social work student interns, from actually 4 different universities in the metro area. And I've been doing that for 10 years. I've had 27 amazing students, and they've taken advantage of a wonderful opportunity at Jewish Family Service. Not one of those students has identified as a Jewish person, which I find rather amazing in some ways. And so I guess my question is what would be your encouragement to those of us who are non-Jews in Jewish organizations? How can we be supportive of this very complex issues you've raised today? And also, how do we continue? I think that's probably enough. So there you go. And any of my colleagues can add to this.
Would you like to come up here? So, of those students, are you saying none were by birth Jewish?
Correct.
None of them were by birth Jewish. Correct. Well, look, let me start with the good, and then I'll come back to the maybe the bigger challenge. I think the contribution to our society of institutions like the Jewish Family and Children's Services here and around the country is enormous, and one that we should be very, very proud of. In almost all communities, they serve the community at large. They may serve in many services in ours, in several of the sub-services, they're overwhelmingly not Jewish in terms of their clientele, let alone their staff. And so I think that their contribution to the issue of social justice and tikkun olam, repairing the world, are wonderful, and helping students understand that expression of a commitment to those values as being consistent with social work and Jewish thinking, I think is very, very important. And as I mentioned, I do think that for the generation of the millennials who are increasingly interested in the question of justice and community service, social work can become a much more attractive field than it might have been at certain times. I think the challenge is, what is the future of an organization like a Jewish Family and Children's Service as a distinctly Jewish institution, and what is Jewish about it? If the staff are not primarily Jewish, if the clients are not primarily Jewish, if you come back to my example of the caseworker with the young woman who wants to intermarry, and the answer is, well, if that's good for you, that's good for you. You know, is that an appropriate Jewish response to that question? Now, I think it is, okay, but it certainly poses a challenge. And I think that increasingly you're going to see agencies like yours become, in reality, more and more secular, because that's where the marketplace is.
Well, it's also partly where the funding is also.
Right.
In terms of
Right.
the funding.
Right. I think what we're saying to ours, so I'm not speaking out of school because I say it publicly, is that as an agency committed to meeting the needs of the larger community, it should define its sense of mission and purpose within the range of opportunities that are there. However, if it believes that there is something uniquely Jewish that it has, then it needs to also demonstrate a particularistic agenda. So for example, addressing the needs of Holocaust survivors. And I don't know how many there are here in Denver. In St. Louis, there aren't many left, but I consider that a specifically Jewish imperative that needs to be approached from a Jewish sensitivity. And while you might be great in providing social services, I think there needs to be a larger context from the agency perspective in doing that. Or addressing the issue of domestic violence in the Orthodox community, which, I mean, I'm not saying it's bigger there, but it's there, and it's very hard for members of the Orthodox community to cross that line and come into what they perceive as less culturally competent kinds of environments. Well, maybe an agency like yours or like ours needs to apply a portion of its resources specifically to that, even if it's not where the funding is coming from United Way or foundations or stuff like that. And then I think that's a reasonable compromise. I doubt that the Jewish community is going to want to make big investments, particularly in those kinds of agencies that are providing generic services, but I think would rally behind the continuing need of a general social service agency providing particularistic services to the Jewish community, or responding when a crisis comes up and responding particularly to the needs of the Jewish population. And then I'll give you one more example and then I'll stop. One of the things that has long excited me about what we do internationally is that when a crisis breaks out around the world, and so let's talk about the recent Soviet invasion of Soviet Georgia. When that war broke out, within a day and a half, our overseas funded agencies, the Jewish Agency for Israel and the Joint Distribution Committee, which are two big international service providers, had identified virtually the status of virtually every Jew in Soviet Georgia, found out if they were safe, what they needed, whether they wanted to get on a plane and go to Israel and whatever. And I say to myself, you know, we can do that in Soviet Georgia because the way we're structured. But if that happened, and if all of a sudden a huge ice storm descended on Denver and the power went out in half the city, would your agency be able to identify the seniors at risk who are isolated, living by themselves without families around them to take care of them or without the social skills? I'd like to see us do that. I'd like to see us develop that capacity here. That to me would be an extraordinary expression of the Jewish component of the work that we do. So I think, look at it from the bright side that you provide great value to the community at large, and then I would encourage the leadership, and as a senior worker, maybe you have an influence here, to look at what can be the uniquely Jewish agenda of that agency in recognition of its history and its role.
Maybe we have time for one more question or one more comment?
Yes, sir.
What happens if we do nothing and the indifference continues? Where will we be 10 years from now, and what crisis may happen or may not?
When you say the indifference, you mean social work's inability to penetrate the management?
Yeah, social work, the indifference of the organizations to say social work is important.
Yeah.
So nothing will happen, so nothing changes. And so what will happen, or do you see, will take place 10 years from now? What crisis do you see?
They say that after Moses there were no prophets, so I'm going to be very, very careful. I think you can see some scenarios. I think you can see other professional disciplines going out and adopting the skill sets that social work possesses and making them their own. I actually hope that they do, because those people are in those roles. I think they're far away from it. But you may see the nonprofit management people start to recognize that knowing the finances and the business aspects are insufficient for running nonprofit organizations. I think that you may very, very well see on the flip side disintegration of certain kinds of organizations because they lack the necessary skill sets to run themselves, or an inability to address the pieces of the operation that are not market-driven successfully. So if you look at the Jewish Community Center, why do we create a Jewish Community Center at the turn of the century? We created to provide some basic social services to immigrants and to help them acculturate to Jewish life. Today, the big Jewish agenda on the Jewish Community Center is identity, if your Jewish center is oriented that way. Reaching out to children, getting them involved in Jewish camping, maybe taking them to Israel, and stuff like that. Well, in general, those service lines do not generate very, very good cash flow. Okay? They're basically investment opportunities. And JCCs around the country are very stressed in terms of finances. And it's very, very likely that JCC leadership, if you go back to my example of the nursing home, entrepreneurs, in partnership with MBA-trained executives will, as I have heard, focus on where the market is. And they may be able to survive as institutions, but completely miss the point of what it is they're supposed to be doing. And I think that that would be tragic, and I think that that's the risk. That's the risk of being so focused on the bottom line business aspects that one loses the picture of the mission. And if there isn't somebody at the core of that, and at the end of the day, this maybe sounds self-serving, the most important person in an organization is the CEO, is the executive. That's the person who's there full-time. Now, they may not be good, okay, and you get rid of them, but at the end of the day, success or failure is built around that person's understanding of what it is they're supposed to do. That executive not fully committed to mission, not having the full Jewish background, and that's another piece. I was talking, I recently announced that in a few years I'm going to retire, and we're beginning the process of succession, and I was out with one of my donors, and he was asking me how he thought the search was, I thought the search was going to go. And knowing some of the people involved, and he said, well, do you think it's conceivable that they would hire somebody who wasn't Jewish? And I hadn't really thought about it in that context, but certainly at Family and Children's Services, and even at some JCCs, there are executives who are not Jewish. The former executive at that nursing home I mentioned, who ran it for many, many years, wasn't Jewish. Is that conceivable? Is it conceivable that the chief executive of the local Jewish community wouldn't be Jewish? And what would that mean for the ability to respond to mission? So it worries me a great deal. I'm hoping that through the work that you're doing here, conversations amongst lay leadership, we can start to reset the balance. Okay, it's not going to be what it was when I started out in the field, but can we reset the balance? If not, I fear you'll see organizations wither away, and I fear you'll see us miss great opportunities to provide services for the next generation. That's it, right? Thank you, boss.